They called him a quitter. Now he holds every UFC finishing record. The guy who got submitted by Jim Miller became the most dangerous submission artist in UFC history. Most finishes, most submissions, most bonuses. We're about to count down the 8 moments that transformed Charles Oliveira from Brazil's biggest disappointment into one of its greatest champions. Number 8, the disease that should have ended his life before it began. Cidade Tiradentes, Sao Paulo. Murder rate 60 per 100,000 residents. One of Brazil's most dangerous favelas. Charles Oliveira was born into this war zone, but at age 7, a different enemy attacked, rheumatic fever. It attacks the heart, joints, and brain. For 2 years straight, Charles lived in hospital beds. His legs would go completely numb. Doctors said he might never walk normally again. His mother worked double shifts just to pay for treatment. His father took any job he could find, but in those sterile corridors, his neighbor Paulo introduced him to something that would change everything: Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Physical therapy became his obsession. 1 month after leaving the hospital, Charles won his first BJJ tournament. The sick kid from the favela had found his calling, but tragedy was lurking around the corner. Number 7, the day his mentor was gunned down in the streets. Charles was 14 when the phone call came. Paulo had been murdered, shot dead by favela gangs. The man who saved his life was gone. This could have broken him. Instead, it lit a fire that burns to this day. From that moment, every single fight became a tribute to Paulo. Every submission, every victory, for the friend who couldn't see his dreams come true. Amateur BJJ record, undefeated. Tournament after tournament, Charles was unstoppable. But BJJ tournaments don't pay the bills in the favela. Charles needed to fight for money. Amateur MMA record, 12-0. 6 knockouts, 5 submissions. 2006, his professional debut. 3 fights, 3 finishes, 1 unforgettable night. The favela kid was ready for the big leagues. Number 6, how Brazil's elite turned their mockery into his war cry. Do Bronx, that's what they called him at tournaments, but it wasn't respect, it was pure mockery. Do Bronx, the favela kid. Rich kids from Sao Paulo's suburbs looking down on the boy who couldn't afford proper gear. They wouldn't train with him, wouldn't roll with the dirty favela kid. Charles did something that would define his entire career. He took their insult and made it his badge of honor. Every time they said it, they reminded him exactly what he was fighting for. Tournament after tournament, the Do Bronx kid embarrassed Brazil's elite. UFC debut, August 2010, 21 years old. The biggest stage in combat sports. First round submission victory.
Oliveira turning it into an armbar. Oh, he's done. Wow. The hype is for real.
The favela kid had made it to the promised land. But making it to the UFC and surviving in the UFC, those are 2 completely different wars. Number 5, why his early success set him up for the most brutal fall. Charles burst into the UFC like a submission machine. Darren Elkins, first round triangle. Efren Escudero, third round rear naked choke. The UFC had found their Brazilian superstar. Or so they thought. But the UFC lightweight division isn't just amateur tournaments in Sao Paulo. This is where Olympic wrestlers meet world-class strikers. Jim Miller, 29 fights, 23 wins. A submission specialist who'd been breaking limbs since Charles was in diapers. Charles started strong, but Miller had been here before. Knee bar, Charles tapped. The submission specialist had been submitted. Fans were confused. This was supposed to be the next big thing? Donald Cerrone, cowboy, 40 professional fights, a legend who'd finished champions. Charles crumbled. The finisher had been finished. 2 losses in a row. Questions started swirling. Did Charles have what it takes? The answer would come in the most devastating way possible. Number 4, the delayed reaction knockout that became MMA legend. September 2012, Cub Swanson. A featherweight destroyer with dynamite in his hands. Charles started perfect. Takedowns, ground control, working his game plan. But Swanson found his range. Body shots. Then a monster overhand right to the temple. Charles took the shot. He looked fine for a second, completely normal. He took one step back, then another. Then his brain caught up with the damage. He collapsed like a building being demolished. The arena exploded. Nobody had ever seen anything like it. The delayed reaction knockout became instant MMA legend, but for Charles, it became something much worse. Internet forums went crazy. Glass chin, can't take a shot, overhyped. For the first time in his life, Charles questioned everything. His chin, his heart, his future. He had no idea that his lowest moment was still coming. Number 3, the trilogy of shame that almost ended his career forever. Max Holloway, August 2015. A rising star with relentless pressure. Charles was getting pieced up, hurt badly. That familiar voice whispered in his head. He quit, turned away from the fight.
He may be, if this, oh no. Oh, it looks like an injury. The doctor is...
The crowd booed mercilessly, but this time quitting came with a price. His esophagus tore from the stress. The entire left side of his body went completely numb. Doctors didn't know if he'd ever fight again. Hell, they didn't know if he'd ever walk again. 6 months of rehab, learned to use his left side all over again. Paul Felder was supposed to be his comeback. Instead, it became his nightmare. Vicious elbows from the bottom. Charles couldn't escape. The voice whispered again. He quit again. Tap to strikes.
Paul Felder gets Charles Oliveira out of there.
Oliveira tapped those shots.
The second time in less than 2 years. Ricardo Lamas, one more chance to prove he belonged. Lamas locked in the guillotine. Charles tapped almost instantly. 3 quits in 3 fights. The MMA world had seen enough. Quitter, weak, cut him, waste of talent, mental midget. By 2017, Charles Oliveira's reputation was in ruins. His confidence was shattered, but sometimes you have to break completely before you can rebuild into something unbreakable. Number 2, the complete transformation that defied every expert prediction. 2018, Charles made a decision that would rewrite MMA history. New gym, new coaches, new mindset, new Charles. They didn't just train his body, they performed surgery on his soul. The mental game that had been his weakness became his strength. Clay Guida, first round guillotine. The old Charles was back, but nobody believed it yet. 1 win doesn't erase 3 quits. Christos Giagos, second round rear naked choke. Then came the rematch that would define everything. Jim Miller, the man who first submitted him.
Oh yeah, it's over. It's over.
There's the tap. Charles Oliveira does it again.
Charles had his revenge, but he was just getting started. Nick Lentz, knocked out on the feet. The submission specialist had become a knockout artist. David Timur, demolished. Kevin Lee, destroyed. Jared Gordon, finished. 8 straight wins, 7 finishes. The most dangerous man in the lightweight division. But then came the ultimate test. Tony Ferguson, December 2020. 29 professional fights, never been submitted, not once. Charles locked in an armbar. Ferguson, the man who never quit, tried everything to escape. The most submission-proof fighter in MMA history survived Charles, but at what cost? Charles won by unanimous decision and broke down crying. He'd just done the impossible. Vacant UFC lightweight championship, Charles Oliveira versus Michael Chandler. After 11 years of pain, heartbreak, and redemption, this was it. Number 1, how the biggest quitter in UFC history became its most dangerous champion. UFC 262, Houston, Texas. 16,000 screaming fans. Charles Oliveira versus Michael Chandler for the vacant lightweight championship. Vegas made Charles the favorite, but critics still had doubts. What happens when he gets hurt? The quitter versus the knockout artist. The favela kid versus the American dream. Round 1 started like a war, both men throwing bombs. Then Chandler landed a massive right hand that dropped Charles hard. Charles was rocked, badly hurt. The old Charles would have broken right there. But this Charles had been forged in fire. He survived the storm. Round 2, Charles came out like a man possessed. He measured Chandler perfectly, waited for the opening, left hook. Perfect placement. Chandler's lights went out instantly. Michael Chandler crumbled. The fight was over. Charles dropped to his knees. After 11 years and 28 UFC fights, he was champion of the world.
And new undisputed UFC.
He held that belt like a man holding his newborn child. He thought about Paulo, murdered in the favelas, his parents working double shifts, every person who called him a quitter. The kid from Cidade Tiradentes had conquered the world. Today, Charles Oliveira owns records that may never be broken. Most finishes in UFC history, 21. Most submissions in UFC history, 16. Most performance bonuses in UFC history, 18. Most post-fight bonuses overall, 19. He lost the belt on the scales against Justin Gaethje, a half-pound mistake, but ended up winning by first-round submission. Charles proved he belonged at that level. The fight with Islam Makhachev would give his haters something. Second-round submission. But even without the belt, Charles proved he was still the most dangerous man at 155 against Dariush and in a rematch versus Chandler. But Charles's greatest victory isn't in the octagon. It's what he's done for kids like him. He's built training centers in favelas across Brazil, giving kids hope where there was none. Every kid he trains carries a piece of his story, proof that your worst moment doesn't define your destiny. Charles "Do Bronx" Oliveira didn't just become a champion. He became proof that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out who you really are. From hospital patient to record holder, from quitter to king, from broken to unbreakable. And at 35 years old, he's still not done writing his legend. That's a story worth fighting for.